Hello. So last week we were talking about matter and we were talking about energy. And this week we're going to talk a little bit more about biological processes that involve these transformations of matter as we use it, as we incorporate it into our body, for example, and how it leaves our body. So you'll remember that all matter is composed of atoms. And that is the fundamental building block of molecules, atoms would be, and that we have in our bodies and in other living things, we have lots of organic molecules. And one characteristic of an organic molecule is it is composed of a carbon skeleton. So that would mean that there are carbon atoms that then are bonded to other atoms, but the carbon makes up the kind of the backbone of the molecule. So you are probably very familiar with the different types of organic molecules. So if we look at the types, for example, we have carbohydrates. And like this implies, carbohydrates are composed of carbon and hydrogen. We also have proteins. Now, proteins are composed of amino acids. And this amino actually is a group that is bonded to the carbon skeleton, and it contains nitrogen. So NH3 is my amino group. And so this is important because in order to build proteins, we need nitrogen as a nutrient. We also have nucleic acids. An example of nucleic acid would be our genetic material, which is DNA. And this also contains nitrogen. Another thing that the DNA contains is phosphorus. So we have nitrogen and phosphorus. We'll just put phosphate. So for example, you might have heard or learned about the DNA molecule and how it's a double helix, and the sides of the molecule contain a sugar phosphate backbone. And then you have like adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine form up the bases of the DNA molecule. So this is really necessary because it is in the DNA. It's the DNA that actually codes for the proteins, and it codes for also the differences that we observe between individuals in a population, but also the differences that we observe between species. And one of the interesting things is that almost all things that are alive today use that same genetic code and to produce their proteins. And so that's why, for example, we can take genes from a virus and insert it into a plant, and the plant is able to read that genetic code. So we also have, the last one would be lipids. And so lipids would include fats, but they would also include our steroid hormones. And so these are the different types of organic molecules that we have in our body. So primarily, these are composed of the elements carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfate. So you could remember these are the elements that make up the majority of the organic molecules, and you could remember it as SNOPs. So that's an acronym or a mnemonic device that you could use to remember these. Now, we also have some other nutrients that are referred to as trace nutrients. So we could talk about, or trace elements. So we could talk about trace nutrients. And these would include, say, for example, iron. So where do we need iron in our bodies? That would be to produce hemoglobin, which is the molecule that transports oxygen in our bodies. We would also say, for example, need calcium. So calcium is necessary for the ossification of our bones, of our skeleton, but also calcium is an essential ion that is necessary for muscular contraction and the generation of a nervous impulse. So we also need things like sodium and chloride. These have a positive and a negative charge to them because they tend to be ions and in solution and dissolved in water, and we transport those in our blood. So those are some examples of some of the nutrients that we need in order to build our organic molecules.